In 1989, a man called Bob Lazar walked into a Las Vegas TV station and gave a remarkable interview. He said that he'd worked out in the Nevada desert at a top-secret facility known as Area 51. He said he worked on a highly classified project, reverse engineering recovered alien spacecraft. His story was a worldwide sensation, and Area 51 became a household name, synonymous with UFOs, secret projects, and little green men. And yet, neither the US government nor its military have ever denied his claims, and they still don't officially confirm that Area 51 exists, despite satellite photos proving it does. Many dismiss Bob Lazar as a fantasist, and yet others see him as a whistleblower, exposing a government cover-up of UFOs and alien contact.
A once secret airbase in the Nevada desert is marking an unofficial anniversary today.
Area 51 was one of the most secretive places on the planet, but that anonymity vanished forever because of what happened 25 years ago. A controversial electronics whiz told a fantastic tale during a TV interview, and the story still reverberates today.
The I-Team's George Knapp played a part in what became an international sensation. He's here with an update.
Setting the stage, Dave, you might not know this, but 25 years ago, a young anchor woman named Paula Francis and I were prepping for the 5 o'clock news when we learned that our scheduled live interview had canceled. We placed a call to aviator John Lear to ask if he could get a friend of his to fill the spot, a guy who reportedly worked out near Area 51 and had seen flying saucers out there. It sounded outrageous at the time, but that interview with Bob Lazar turned Area 51 upside down. We coaxed a reluctant Lazar into returning to Las Vegas to talk about it.
I don't know. Sometimes I really do regret it, and I almost feel like apologizing to him, saying that, you know, I'm sorry I let things out. Can I have my job back?
My personal opinion, based on comments I've gotten from the Deputy Director for Science and Technology at CIA, would seem to indicate that Bob was perhaps an unwitting participant in a program designed to introduce someone with a technical background to some elements of the UFO research projects going on out at the test site.
I have no doubts that Lazar actually was in a place where top secret investigations were going on. I'm not sure about all the details that have emerged from his account, but he certainly gives me the impression that he was actually there.
Do I believe Bob Lazar? My answer to that is yes. And heck, it's going on 8 years that I've known him. His story has never changed. He wasn't in it for the publicity. He surely wasn't in it for the money. He lost everything he had. I believe he's totally sincere.
As far as I can tell, he's a bright guy who tells a great tale and who's told it often to people who have not checked on him, who accept the notion that, well, the government wiped his slate clean.
Basically, I think he had an experience. I think he saw some things that shocked him, was subject to some conditions and experiences that were very unnerving to him and very profound.
He said, you would love to see what's out there because it's like beyond science fiction. He said, and I wish I could talk to you about it, but I can't. And that's as close as he ever got to telling me anything that happened out there.
You'll find many people who have seen these discs. Question is, where do they come from? Bob Lazar may be one of the few people who can tell us that they're from somewhere else.
I've no doubt that there's a relatively small number of people within the intelligence, military intelligence and scientific and technical intelligence community who are aware of what's going on, and an even smaller group who are actually organizing top secret research into this phenomenon.
There's been an operating airbase out at the location known as Area 51 since the 1950s, when it was home to the CIA's top secret SR-71 Blackbird spy plane. Then in the 1970s, it became the test flight center for the F-117 stealth fighter and the B-2 stealth bomber.
It's fairly public knowledge that we have a super secret facility in the mountains in northern Nevada, referred to as Groom Lake, Area 51 of the Nellis Air Force Base test range. It's also been referred to as Dreamland. This is an area that has been known but officially denied for many decades. All of our super secret aircraft have been developed and test flown out in this particular area. So it only makes sense that if you have something as sophisticated as a flying saucer and the related technology to that, that would certainly be one of the prime locations you'd want to go.
What you see is an ordinary looking Air Force base. It's nothing to write home about, but because the government won't talk about it, everyone wants to see it. The military has never said there are no UFOs. It's never directly denied any of the Area 51 stories. It would have been so simple when these claims came out, these Papoose Lake claims, for the military to simply say, look, we have nothing there. They could take a few reporters to this area and show them. Nothing there. The military hasn't done it. The military has stonewalled. It has remained silent. And that's the most damning thing that they can do.
Area 51 to this day is not acknowledged. That is to say, the Air Force does not admit that it exists. This status has been maintained very carefully, particularly in the last few years. The puzzle is that the base has clearly been very active for quite a while, and you can see that there are about 700 to 1,000 people traveling from Las Vegas every day. So essentially the bulk of what has gone on there in the last 10 years has not emerged from the black.
This airplane the program was terminated. The airplanes were put in mothballs for 20 years before they admitted the existence of the aircraft. There's programs that they're working on today that are 50 years ahead of anything that you and I could even conceive of, and that we may never see the light of day.
Would you say it's America's most top secret military base?
As far as an operational test facility, it's probably the most secret test facility in the free world, yes.
So there is no question that the facility is there, that the government has said very little in the past about it. Now, the real question, I suppose, is, are there any flying saucers out there?
No one had associated flying saucers with Area 51 until Bob Lazar's interview hit television screens around the world. He said that he worked at an underground facility called S4. The top secret project was codenamed Galileo.
They would call at a specific time. For instance, the operator would say, Mr. Lazar, it's now 4:15 a.m. We expect you to be at McCarran Airport at 4:45.
your plane will be leaving at such and such time. I'd drive there, check in, board the plane, and the plane would fly out to Groom Lake. It would land there. I'd get off the plane and wait, and there would be a bus to take me and whoever else is going to S4, Papoose Lake, which is about 15 miles south of there, and then I would check in at S4.
Tell me about how you felt on your very first trip out.
The first trip out there was actually very exciting because it seemed so cloak and dagger to me, especially after I got in the bus with the blacked out windows. I kind of thought that was neat. Drove out to the site, and then it was checked in, guards walking around with guns, and I was sure what I was working on was going to be pretty fascinating.
He says that within a few days of working out at S4, he was shown an actual flying disc in one of the hangars.
When I was brought in by bus, and for the first time, one of the hangar doors, the one on the end, was open. The bus drove up and we stopped there, and clear as day in the hangar, taking up almost all the hangar, was the disc. Looked like something right out of a science fiction movie. And as I walked in there, I thought, well, this is the new advanced aircraft we've been working on, and this is why people keep seeing flying saucers, because it's ours and we've just been testing it probably for all these years.
And what color and size was it?
It was a dull stainless steel, pewter gray, very unimpressive color-wise. About 52.8 feet in diameter and about 16 feet high.
So was it actually a recovered craft that you were working on, or was it one that scientists had built as a mock-up of a recovered craft?
Well, whether it was recovered, given, or what, it was not built as a mock-up. It was an alien craft built on another world. There was absolutely no doubt about that.
Lazar claims that he was one of only 22 people who had something called majestic clearance to work on the craft itself.
The whole aim of the project was to take these craft, or the one in particular that I was working on, and try and duplicate its systems and subsystems with earthly materials. The work that I did basically entailed back engineering the power and propulsion system, and I opted to start with the power, the reactor that ran the craft.
I knew immediately if his credentials could be verified, if even part of his story could be verified, it'd be one tremendous expose.
George Knapp was a long-standing TV reporter. He'd heard enough of the UFO rumors over the years to appreciate how big a scoop this could be if Lazar was telling the truth.
He gave me information about his background, educational background and employment background. I started with his claim to have worked at Los Alamos Lab. We went to Los Alamos and got nothing even close to cooperation. They wouldn't respond to our phone calls. They say, we have no information on Bob Lazar. There's nothing in the files. I said, are you sure now? No, nothing in the files. I showed them the phone book entry that Bob had kept that said he was there. I showed him the newspaper article that showed that he was there. Basically, Los Alamos Lab tried to thwart me at every step. Were completely uncooperative in trying to get information about Bob, and I found that to be the case at every step of the way in trying to verify his background.
Thursday, 12:37 p.m.
Former NASA mission specialist Bob Exler had heard about Area 51 and Groom Lake when he worked on the Apollo and Space Shuttle projects. He was intrigued by Lazar's claims and started to investigate.
I did a variety of research relative to Bob Lazar. I actually met him. I obtained a copy of his what they call a W-2 form, which is one of the IRS documents associated with pay. His particular form indicated that he worked for the U.S. Department of Naval Intelligence. They informed me that it was a genuine document. It was not something that had been fabricated. There were a variety of numbers, contract numbers and so forth issued on the document, which I was able to research, again finding that these were highly classified numbers. In fact, Internal Revenue Service ran into a brick wall when it came to trying to track down the actual employer associated with the document. And then again, with the Social Security Administration, we found that Bob Lazar's records had in fact been bleached clean. There was nothing there, in spite of the fact that the document clearly indicated that Social Security taxes had been taken out of his pay.
Not everyone who's researched Bob Lazar believes his claims. Stanton Friedman is one of the most respected authors in the UFO field today. He's a former nuclear physicist with top secret clearance and has many friends and contacts in the Black Project world.
I've looked at considerable depth into Bob Lazar's claims, both about himself and about propulsion system. Those are fairly elaborate claims. I've talked to the schools that he claims to have received degrees from. I've checked on his high school record. I talked to Los Alamos Lab where he was supposedly a scientist and so forth. I have come up totally empty. Now, when a guy lies like that, you get very wary. And, you know, it has all the trimmings, his story, of a Walter Mitty story. Somebody in his imagination was, you know, stronger, brighter, faster than anybody else. I don't doubt that he did some work at Los Alamos and other places. He's clever. He drives a jet-powered car, fixes radiation detectors. So he may have performed some service. But I can find no reason to think that he worked out there on a flying saucer.
I mean, I had to wonder whether this guy was making this stuff up, but then I see the phone book and I see the newspaper article, and I talked to people who worked with Bob at the lab and who said, in fact, that he did work on classified projects, yet no one can find any records of his background.
The people that I worked with, colleagues, the people I went to school with, obviously knew I was there, and people at Los Alamos, I was friends with, and people that worked under me and alongside of me knew I was there and, you know, cooperate what was going on. But, you know, officially, it's very difficult to get information from the people in charge.
To further prove his claims, Lazar agreed to take a polygraph test, which he passed.
The thing that is interesting about polygraph is that if you're embellishing or if you don't completely believe what you're saying, it is very, very easy to detect. All it really will tell you is that the individual believes with 100% conviction that what he's reporting is exactly as he recalls and as he believes it to be. And that clearly was the case with Bob Lazar. Now, could his perception have been a bit askew? Yes, that's possible, but he clearly wasn't lying.
I think Bob is even open to the possibility that perhaps he had been used in some sort of misinformation or disinformation campaign. I mean, look at him. He has a pirate flag floating on his house. He races jet cars. He likes fast women. He likes guns. He's technically capable, so in that sense, he may be perfect for this kind of a program. Technically capable, scientifically knowledgeable, and yet completely discreditable at a moment's notice. If you wanted to test public reaction to a story about Area 51 and then suddenly discredit it afterwards, Bob may have been the most qualified person in the country.
Lazar says that on one occasion he was escorted into the flying disc that he saw in the hangar to analyze its propulsion system.
It was obviously made to be piloted by something smaller than the average human being, very cramped in there.
What were the size of these seats that were in there?
The seats were very small. I'd say about 1/3 to 1/4 the size of a normal human seat. A lot of people say, boy, it must have been exciting to go in there, and I always say it wasn't. It was a very ominous feeling. I know it sounds silly, but it's so unearthly in there.
You have spoken to someone who's actually seen a UFO under a tarpaulin at Area 51.
I have. I've spoken to several people who've seen UFOs or disc-shaped craft out there. There was a woman who was a secretary for a major defense contractor at the Nevada test site who worked on nuclear programs, who told me that she had sat in on conversations between military and civilian contractors at which the Roswell case had been discussed, at which it had been discussed taking some Roswell material to Area 51. The level of secrecy during those meetings was great. Afterward, they'd take the ribbons out of the typewriters she was typing on. She was ready to tell me about this, and I had this conversation with her on the phone. The next day after this conversation takes place, she's visited by two men who say that they work for the company she used to work for, reminding her that she is still under a security oath, told her, we know that you do a lot of traveling back and forth, a lot of long drives between Las Vegas and LA. We'd hate for something to happen to you or your family. No interview. I mean, it happened again and again and again. Same scenario.
Lazar says that in addition to being shown inside the disc, he actually saw it take off from the lake bed.
I was brought into the hangar for one of the short duration tests, and the craft was already outside on the lake bed, and that was pretty much of a marvelous sight. It's a huge thing. It's like seeing a house lift off the ground. You can't imagine the energy involved to do that. Because of the extremely high energy output and the fact that the outside of the craft is used as a conductor, that does ionize the air. And the crafts do, as a byproduct of this, glow at night, much like a fluorescent tube will light up. So, you know, bright, strange, jumping lights in the sky, that does explain that.
Would you categorically say there is no way that humans could have built the craft that you saw?
Absolutely. I will categorically deny that. Well, I don't know. How exactly should I put that? I guess I can just say it straight out. There is no way that any government on this earth could produce that craft, period. And I defy anyone to argue that point.
One of the big questions that's hung over this whole story is whether Lazar saw a man-made flying disc and not an alien spacecraft.
A lot of these craft which are being developed in secrecy in the United States are tested at night, and one can imagine that seen through kind of half-closed eyes, something like an F-117 stealth fighter or a B-2 bomber, side-on or front-on, would look remarkably like, say, a flying saucer or a UFO.
You see an F-117, or you see tacit blue, or you see a B-2. Particularly if you see it from some fairly unusual angle, you're going to have a very hard time relating that to conventional aircraft. Some of these things can look very strange indeed. So, you know, an unusual but decidedly terrestrial aircraft can certainly present the appearance of a disk from many angles.
I think for anyone who's been out into the western United States and seen the kind of place it is and let their imaginations run riot a bit, it is possible to imagine in these vast test areas technologies which are highly exotic, highly revolutionary, and would change the way we feel about science today. However, to say that that is alien science derived from beyond this world, I think is something which is just, it is unbelievable. It's too much to absorb.
Do you think that some of the truth certainly lies out there in the middle of the Nevada desert at Groom Lake?
I would expect that some of the truth may very well lie out in the desert near Groom Lake. It's the right place for some of it to be. It's isolated, it's under control, it's high security. I don't think we've yet scratched the surface on what's happening out there with regard to flying saucers.
According to Lazar, the craft that they were secretly testing out in the desert at night used an exotic anti-gravity propulsion system.
The reactor itself was an incredibly advanced system. This was an antimatter reactor. This is something we could only dream of having, something that could put out huge amounts of power that rivals several nuclear power plants running at capacity. What happens is a great gravity distortion is created and you're essentially bending space toward the craft. The craft becomes part of that space, and then when the reactors, or when the gravity amplifiers are shut down, the craft is essentially where it was focused. It's a very difficult thing to grasp. It happens virtually instantaneously because of the fact that gravity distorts time. And if you're bending space and time along with it, when you wind back up in that place, you're there between the ticks of a clock.
Looking at nighttime video films out in the test site area, we've seen video of craft that were luminous, that would move across the sky as if it was skipping a stone across water, or sort of a sewing machine effect. What we see across the screen are a series of lights, of dashes of light, as the object moves from point A to point B. Therefore, we are seeing what you might call a shadow effect of the propulsion mechanism at work.
Bob Lazar is not the only person who's come forward and claimed to have worked out at the base on flying discs. Former US Marines test pilot Bill Uhouse worked out at Groom Lake and other top-secret locations for more than 40 years, working for the Pentagon and civilian contractors on a variety of highly classified projects, including, he says, a flying disc recovered from a crash in Kingman, Arizona in May 1953. He said that he'd been cleared to do this interview and to discuss certain information, but asked us not to show his face.
What were you actually working on out there?
One of the things I worked on was a flying disc simulator. It was designed in New Mexico by a separate staff that built it in parallel with the actual craft that they had intended to fly. The purpose of the simulator was to train pilots to fly this strange-looking craft. The simulator was a 10-meter round disc. The skin was made of boron composite material, not unlike that you see on the F-117.
How did you know how to build the simulator?
Essentially, there weren't any plans. The plans were generated as we constructed it. And there was a process there that took quite a while for us to even understand the concept way back in the 50s.
Uhouse says that Lazar did work at Area 51.
I think Bob is saying exactly what he knows, and I know a little bit about Bob from a different standpoint than a lot of the people know and what's been written about him, but Bob Lazar is not lying as far as his place and position and the activity he was involved with at the time, although some of it, you know, he couldn't recall, but there's a lot of reasons why Bob was hired, number one. You know, here's the thing. Take a guy like Bob, send him out there, you know, somebody said, you know, aliens, blah, 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 blah. You know, all of a sudden you're thinking about 9 alien crafts. You know, they may have not been 9 alien crafts.
Bravo 7014, contact Deepwater Chicken 8.
Do you believe that the government has recovered alien spacecraft?
I have no doubts whatsoever that the United States has actually recovered a number of extraterrestrial vehicles.
And what do they do with them?
I think that since 1947, there have been efforts to try and duplicate the technology, what is referred to as reverse engineering. And I don't know how far they've got, but some reports indicate that we've actually been test flying within a limited area actual alien vehicles or terrestrial vehicles, United States vehicles, which have been made using alien technology.
Could these not just be military aircraft?
Well, I think it's quite possible some of them are military aircraft. I've heard from very reliable sources, including a leading specialist on unmanned aerial vehicles, that we have developed some disc-shaped platforms for aerial reconnaissance, some quite small, maybe some larger, which are being utilized by the Americans and have been built by the Americans.
That's 6389 Delta, Las Vegas Tower, runway 1 and a left taxi in position and hold traffic crossing downfield. Thank you, sir. 89 Delta.
Was it a hard secret to keep?
It was a virtually impossible secret to keep. But I did play by the rules, and it caused a lot of problems. It caused problems in my family life. I mean, imagine being married at the time, and you know, you get a call, you know, perhaps at night, and a strange voice on the phone. Okay, you disappear, you can't tell your wife who it was on the phone, where you're going, and you come back, you know, sometime early in the morning. I mean, what is she going to think?
Unaware of where he was going every day and being absent from home for long periods, Bob's relationship with his wife had deteriorated badly. This was seen as a potential security risk out at the base.
My wife was having an affair with someone else, so they viewed that as a potential emotional instability, and they no longer wanted me coming out until things were cleared up, either for it, you know, it to break up or heal or whatever. But they, that's what put the brakes on everything there.
And did they then stop calling you? Did you get very frustrated about that?
Yeah, then I began to wonder, boy, now they've given me all this information and everything's come to a dead stop. What's going on? And that's when I began to be concerned, and then that's when I said, you know, now it's becoming important that some other people know what was going on.
As the silence turned from days to weeks, he finally decided to tell his wife and closest friends just what he'd been doing.
Were you aware of the security implications?
I was quite aware of what could happen, but I was also aware that these guys would go to any extent to keep their secret, and certainly not have someone that was on the inside running around. And I didn't think it was beyond them at all to make me disappear. Whether, I mean, who knows? I know it sounds more like a movie, but I didn't think it was beyond their capability to kill me, just to stop the word from getting out.
Bob knew the test flight schedule for the discs and took his wife, his best friend Jean Huff, and another friend John Lear out to the desert near the base on a Wednesday night in March 1989.
Huh, it started coming in too.
How far away can that thing pick up stuff if it's like overhead, like up in the air?
Overhead, 300 miles.
Jeez. So it could be any one of these guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that sounds military to me. Yeah, I bet you that's what this is. We got. Oh.
You see that?
Whoa. Yeah, what was that? Did you see that light just come on over there? I was looking right at it.
Yeah.
Here, let me check it out.
Well, that was a shooting star. Right above it was a meteor too. No, there's a steady light.
No, it's a steady light that just came
without
on.
Any kind of.
No, this one right over the range here. It wasn't there, and then I was looking right there, and it blinked on.
It's very bright. That's brighter than a star.
Yeah. Huh? Doesn't look like landing lights.
We got the light clear now, sir. We figured out what the problem is, and whatever that heading is, we're ready for it.
Huh. Interesting.
Okay, just change course.
White light?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's coming at us.
What did you see when you were out there?
Shortly after the flight time that I had recorded, white light came up. Well, not a white light, it was actually more of an amber light. Came up off the ground and hovered, and then began doing radical step maneuvers and darting from one side of the sky to the other, doing some impossible flight characteristics.
Do you think what you saw over the desert that night was an alien spacecraft?
Could I identify it as an ET craft without Bob's help? No, it would have been and you know, like I said, an elliptically shaped saucer doing, you know, just doing moves that we're not capable of, but I could not say that, no, this wasn't some advanced Earth technology.
We got the log clear now, sir. We figured out what the problem is, and whatever that heading is, we're ready for it.
That would be a UFO. It's not blinking, it's not conforming to any sort of FAA lighting regulations, and there you're looking at it. That's like a typical UFO. If it was red, it would be real typical, because that's what most people report, is red lights like that are solid colored. I don't think that's landing lights, because it's curved already and we're still looking at it. Looks like he's curving back. Here he comes. That is a typical military UFO. There you go.
This small group went back to see 2 more Wednesday night flight tests, but on the third trip they were spotted, caught and arrested. Bob was taken to Indian Springs Air Force Base and interrogated.
That interrogation was about as intense as you can possibly get, right stopping short of shooting me in the head.
What were they saying to you?
Everything up to and including that, you know, we can absolutely kill you right now and there'd be no one looking for you at all. And I mean, everything. They threatened my wife. They threatened to kill my wife. They said they'd stop at nothing. They said they thought they made that very clear. They couldn't believe that I had taken anyone out there to show them that, much less left with information like the flight test data, and wanted to know what else I had said, who else I had told specifically. They were crazy. They really were. They were completely out of control.
After this interrogation at Indian Springs Air Force Base, Bob says that he was put under constant surveillance by security personnel. His phones were tapped, his movements were monitored, and he often found his car followed by military helicopters. Worried about what might happen to him and angry about how he was being treated, he decided to hit back and approached a local TV station about an interview.
I thought if I did an interview in silhouette, it would be kind of pushing back a bit. Or say, you guys stop, and not saying too much, but just saying enough just to let them know that I'm pushing back a bit and then lay off, or, you know, it's going to get worse. It was really the only thing I could do.
Did you get any calls from the military or from former workers to say, what the hell are you doing?
Right after the interview aired, Dennis Mariani, who was my supervisor, called, and all he said was, do you have any idea what we're going to do to you now? And that was the end of the phone call. That was the last, well, really second to last communication I had with him. And, you know, then I decided, well, you know, that's it. And really just said everything that I had seen and done, and just wanted to divorce the entire situation.
Even now, more than 20 years later, the jury is still out on Bob Lazar and his claims about his work out at Groom Lake. It's a fascinating story which he's stuck to for more than 2 decades. And although many dismiss it as pure fantasy, the fact is that some of his credentials did check out. In addition, his former employers and even the tax authorities were caught covering up and refusing to release information on him. Why would they do that unless there was something to hide? One thing is for certain, if he is telling the truth, then we're all in for some shocking revelations in the decades to come.
Is the government ever going to say, you know, we've been lying to you for 40 or 50 years? Not a chance. I believe they'd stage an event that is much more like what they do. They'll take a big cargo plane or C-130 or something, take one of the old discs that they've you know, analyzed time and time again, and finished with, go up to a high altitude and push it out the back and then go fly away and say, oh look, the first disc has crashed, you know, here's a flying saucer. I mean, I can almost guarantee that's the route they'd take.
About 54 seconds. There's nothing on their radars on the other.
Certainly there are a lot of questions about Bob's background that have not been satisfactorily answered. But there's too much that Bob knows, I think, that couldn't be explained any other way. He knows about the layout of the base. He knew about people who were involved in security checks. He knew when and where the test flights were going to take place because he took people out there 3 weeks in a row and they videotaped the tests. How did he know this stuff if he, in fact, did not have some kind of inside knowledge?
Do you think he'd make a good conduit of information? I mean, essentially a patsy.
Yes, I do. I think it's quite likely that Lazar was set up, perhaps to knowing that he would give out this information.
It's likely to be a very long time before we discover what is actually being done out of Groom Lake now. They seem to wait anything from 15 to 20 years or more after something has been retired before they acknowledge its existence.
This airplane was built, designed almost 40 years ago. 40 years before that, the hottest thing flying was a Seversky P-35. 40 years before that, it was a balloon. So the technology has not stood still. So there's a very good possibility that we are looking at man-made transportation for the 21st century.
It's been so hopelessly polluted that I'm not sure we will ever get to the bottom of this story, and that's sad. I suspect that whatever was out there, discs, alien or not, had now been moved to some other location, and we may never find them again.
There might have been reason 40 years ago to believe that people couldn't handle the idea of alien visitation. I don't think that's true anymore. I think we're far more sophisticated now.
Do you regret having screwed up at S4 and taking your friends there and blowing your security cover because you could still be working on UFOs today?
Yes and no. Yes, at times I'd like to be able to go back in time and played along with the game and not have done anything, and perhaps to this day still be working on them, because I did feel privileged and it was fascinating work once you can get around all the you know, oppressive military security. And you know, maybe we would have stumbled on something, and yeah, it would have been fascinating. The craft lifted off the ground, virtually noiseless, other than a small corona discharge on the bottom of the craft, indicating the presence of high voltage. That dissipated at about 30 feet, and it stood there completely silently, and moved over to the left, to the right, and sat back down. That was the entire test. However, that was an extremely impressive test. Maybe to someone that really knows little about science or anything, that wouldn't be a whole lot, but you have to realize this craft was about 52 feet in diameter. I don't know exactly how much it weighed, but it weighed a lot. And this was quite a scientific feat, to lift something completely silently, under control, and you know, perform a maneuver like that. The craft itself was, I assume it was metal. It was cold to the touch, that's why I say it was metal, but it was a brushed aluminum, actually just an unfinished stainless steel, not shiny finish to it. Had no seams. It was as if it was injection molded from one giant die. I was completely amazed. I can't really reflect on how it made me feel, but that was exciting.
How would you define gravity? Could you describe in layman's terms its basic principles for us?
Gravity is something difficult to explain because it's something
that we essentially don't understand. It's just something that we can observe. Not much is really known about gravity. There are many theories about it, but they are just mainly theories. There's theories of gravitons, which allege that these subatomic particles that act like an attractive force like gravity that exchange between two pieces of matter. There's also a theory that gravity is a form of wave, an electromagnetic wave. But basically, gravity is a force. It's the attraction, it's the inherent property of matter to have gravity, a mutual attraction for each other. And it's basically all that we really know. Modern science, current science right now, identifies one gravity. It's one force in nature. Apparently, through research at S4 or information gained from one of the crafts they were researching there, it appears that there are two different forms of gravity. One form works on an atomic scale, on subatomic particles, holding pieces of matter, holding atoms themselves together. Another works on a larger scale, the scale we're most familiar with, holding planets in orbit, holding ourselves to the ground, things of that sort. Because it produces a gravitational field, I wouldn't say the craft is invisible during the day. However, if you're under the craft, because of the way the gravity is being used, gravity bends time and space, and it bends light. If you are looking underneath the craft or from certain vantage points, you will actually see what's above the craft. It's really a trick of the way light bends under the influence of gravity. For instance, we can see stars that are behind the sun, that are blocked from our view by the sun. The reason we can see them is because the sun is a tremendous gravitational field and it's bending the light around it where we can see the star. Space-time and gravity are all essentially interrelated. They all act on one another. Gravity bends space. Gravity also distorts time. When you vary one, you essentially vary the other two. As an example, if you have a massive body, say a planet or something that's making a lot of gravity, producing a lot of gravitational waves, if you will, it distorts space. It bends space to it. It also slows down time. These things aren't theories. We know them to be true. We cannot artificially create this because we can't create gravity. But this is how they're all interrelated.
With traveling at the speed of light,
there are several problems traveling at the speed of light. Just a couple of them are the fact that as your speed increases, so does your mass proportionally. In other words, the more energy you put in to go faster begins to slow you down by the fact that it's converted into mass. You have other problems like just traveling at such an extreme velocity, navigational problems, the fact that you might run into little tiny micrometeorites at speeds like this. They would undoubtedly destroy your craft. There's just a whole host of problems that you're going to run into just attempting to do something like that. Aside from the fact the amount of energy required to accelerate to the speed of light is horrendous.
Could you briefly describe Project Looking Glass and Project Sidekick for us?
Project Sidekick was another project going on with Galileo. Galileo was the project that I was involved in. Sidekick dealt with any of the weapon potential of the craft, whether or not the craft had a weapon in it or could it be used as a weapon, but it had something to do with some sort of particle beam configuration where the gravity generator can be used as a lens to focus a weapon of some sort, similar to the SDI device we were working on in the 80s, but with the potential of a focusing device using the gravity generator.
And Project Looking Glass?
Project Looking Glass dealt with the distortion, the fact that there's a time distortion, essentially looking back in time, and by that I do not mean looking back years ago to see the wagon train days. They're looking for distortions that are milliseconds in time, and what that was used for, I don't know, but that was just observing the time, the time distortion, time dilation phenomena of the craft in operation.
What is element 115, Is it found here on Earth, or is it strictly an extraterrestrial material?
115 is strictly an extraterrestrial material. It probably occurs naturally in some other places, maybe other star systems. You know, some people not familiar with science or chemistry say, well, that's ridiculous, all the elements occur on Earth, you know. But that's not true. There are elements on the periodic chart that aren't found on Earth. I believe the Heavy Ion Research Lab in Darmstadt, Germany, has reached element 112 recently. So 115 isn't that far away. And when they synthesize it, it's not like they're making a couple ounces of it. They're talking about 1 or 2 atoms of it. To make any usable quantity of a heavy element like that is virtually impossible. Element 115 is in the top of the reactor. And the base of the reactor apparently is a small, something similar to a cyclotron. It's a particle accelerator. A particle is accelerated to high speed and then deflected up a small tube, and it's aimed at the 115. This transmutes the 115, similar to the way we do that in a normal particle accelerator. This causes a reaction, a radiation emission that we really haven't seen before. It produces antimatter. This antimatter is guided down a tuned tube and reacts with a gas. When matter and antimatter react, they convert to 100% energy. This energy is converted, heat energy, is converted to electrical power in the reactor itself. This is done through a thermoelectric converter. And this electrical power is used to power other subsystems on the craft, though there is no wiring, you know, as we would know it. Also, that's almost a byproduct of the reactor. The reactor also sets up a gravitational wave from the 115 being bombarded. This gravitational wave was present at the top of the reactor and is essentially guided in the same way microwaves are guided, through tuned tubes. And this goes to their amplifying cavities and through the projectors that are in the bottom of the craft.
With the gravity generators running, is there thermal radiation danger to the crew?
There is no thermal radiation while the reactor is running. The thermionic generator is 100% efficient, which is in violation of the first law of thermodynamics. But in fact, it works. Element 115 is stable. And for those familiar with chemistry, we know that elements with higher atomic numbers have shorter and shorter half-lives. However, when you reach a certain point, they call it the island of stability. There is a place, and we've theorized this for a long time, somewhere around 114 to 116, there should be an area in there where the nucleus of the atom is geometrically stable, with protons and neutrons, where it no longer decays. It's not radioactive. 115 is in fact this element. In fact, it does occur again somewhere around element 247. Of course, you know, we're nowhere near synthesizing that, and we can only, you know, predict things like that. But that's where 115 is.
Did they, the aliens, give us element 115 in large quantities?
Whether or not it was given to us, I can't answer that question. However, I was told that we have 500 pounds by one of my co-workers. How it was obtained and, you know, where exactly it came from, I don't know. Whether it came in one of the crafts or, you know, it was separate cargo somewhere. Anyone can speculate, but I was told that was the figure.
You were able to get away with a sample of element 115. How much did you get away with?
No comment.
Several nighttime test flights, unofficially, while off the base. What did you see?
The test flights I saw off the base, actually the best test flight was witnessed by my friends who I had brought out there. At the exact moment the craft was hopping around and doing some really impressive maneuvers, I had turned around and I think was looking for the video camera or something to that effect. But I missed some of the most impressive maneuvers. But the craft was similar to what was done before that I had seen close up, other than the fact that it went above the mountain range, moved a a much greater distance at a much higher rate of speed.
How were you able to find out about the test flight schedules?
The test flight schedules were told to me specifically because I was probably going to have to be present during those times. And at that time, the test flights were taking place on Wednesday nights. And from what they said, that was because that was statistically the least amount of traffic in the area. And that's all that they were concerned about.
Does the propulsion system release any sort of discharge or exhaust?
There was a high voltage discharge on the bottom of the craft, but as far as there being an exhaust, there was none.
Why did they appear as glowing balls of light in the night sky?
Well, that's kind of the same reason why a neon light or a fluorescent light lights up. What you're dealing with is a high energy source in essentially a gas atmosphere, oxygen, nitrogen. And when you apply enough energy to a gas molecule, they emit photons, they emit light. And I don't think it's anything, it's really a byproduct of how the craft operates. When it's emitting that much energy, the gas surrounding the craft emits light. The same reason why lightning is visible. You have a huge electrical discharge, and the gas emits light in the form of lightning bolt. If you were going to see one of these crafts at night operating, it would appear really as a glowing ball or just a bright light in the sky from a distance. Even close up, you'd see a glowing halo around it. This is typically what you'd see in your normal UFO sighting, if you've heard them a lot. However, keep in mind that lights in the sky are caused by much more common things than flying saucers.
Tell us a little more about the aurora you witnessed taking off out of Area 51.
It was a large craft, and the one glimpse I got of it was from the rear, and it had two huge square exhausts with vanes in them. And it was just, it sounded more like a rocket than a jet. I don't know. I even think he did mention that it was liquid methane powered, but there again, you know, working on the disk technology, I really could care less what was rolling around at Area 51, but it did catch my eye.
As a result of going public, have there been any attempts made on your life?
One day when I was getting on Interstate 15, driving down Charleston Boulevard, a car came up alongside of me, and I thought he was just trying to race me to get on the freeway. This was after I had left the project. It was a white, boxy-looking car. Exactly what make and model, I don't know. But I accelerated to get on the freeway to go fast, and there was a gunshot, and the back of the car was hit, and I skidded off into the median. And I stopped, and I was frightened, and I just stood there because I thought the guy was going to be alongside of me and just shoot me. I had nothing to do. I was essentially paralyzed with fear, and I waited there, and then nothing else happened. And do I know it was a government agent trying to kill me? No. Could it have been a drive-by shooting? Maybe. You know, so it wasn't, I mean, it was an attempt on my life, but by who specifically, I don't know. Though I was threatened before I had left, that they threatened my wife's life and my life, so I can only put two and two together and say that they were kind of pissed at me.
In an earlier interview, you had mentioned that they had put a gun to your head. Tell us about that.
That was after we were caught out when I had the test flight schedule, and I brought some friends out to show them the disc test. We got caught out there, and the following day I was debriefed down at Indian Springs Air Force Base. And I was in the room with the security guards that caught us, my supervisor and some other people, and some other security personnel. Yeah, they were essentially grilling me about security and, you know, how could I possibly bring people out there, and I guess I wasn't as responsive as they would like, and they got in my face, and one of them pulled the sidearm out, you know, just pushed it against me.
Have you maintained any contacts with your colleagues out at S4?
No, I never heard from anyone other than for a very brief time after I left. Dennis, who was my supervisor, did try and make contact with me at the meeting place was the Union Plaza Hotel, and I took a friend of mine, Gene Huff, down there, and another friend, a former colleague and scientist from Los Alamos, and we saw him, but I also did recognize some security personnel walking around there from S4, so whether or not it was a setup or what was going on or was trying to talk to me, we never found out, and we left. It just was a real strange situation. I never heard from him since.
As we enter the 21st century, how has your experience changed your beliefs?
Well, if you want to word the question, how are my opinions changed? I would say considerably. And before I was at S4, I was more or less one of the guys that thought, you know, all these government conspiracy and UFO buffs and things like that were complete lunatics. I even remember before I was involved there, a friend showed me a little newspaper clipping and said John Lear was giving a lecture who was touting that aliens from another world came to Earth and there's 70 different species, and I remember laughing on the phone that this guy had lost his mind. And I was also under the impression that, you know, boy, the government's all for the people, and they, you know, they're out here to protect us and all that. You know, after the experiences I had there, everything is completely turned around. You know, the government is doing everything but looking out for us. I mean, the only thing they're looking out is for themselves. You know, obviously the ET craft do exist. Something had to build them, so there must be aliens. And since there are, and the craft are there must be some sort of factory and an entire civilization somewhere. And if in fact that is true, and it apparently is, then there must be others. Actual crafts and technology from another world. And that's probably the most important event in history. It kind of moved from science fiction into reality in my mind. And it really just, I guess, opened my eyes. Let's go! Whether or not we can duplicate them. If we can understand what a device is or how something operates or what its physical makeup is, that's great. But if we can't duplicate it, it's useless to us. So there's really two phases to the project going on there. It's understanding what we're looking at, and then once we understand it, is can we duplicate it with earthly materials and earthly technology? And, you know, unless we've got a handle on both of them, all that technology is useless to us. And if it turns out we can't do that, all we have is one single prized possession that we have to take care of, and that's it.
After all that's been said and done, would you do this over again? What would you do differently?
I would probably have played along for a longer time. I would like to have known a little bit more about the technology, and probably kept quiet if I could have. And possibly never have said anything. I almost wish I had done that. You know, it's it's really only caused headaches and problems. But I believe if I was given the opportunity again to go back in time and redo it, I think I pretty much would have just shut up and gone along with the program. I would have much preferred that instead of the Navy or whoever it was that hand-picked a few renegade scientists here and there, that they turn it over to some more qualified people. Obviously, I was not the most qualified person on propulsion or field propulsion or anything of that sort. I was just some guy. I mean, they could have picked, I could have named 10 or 12 other guys that were more qualified than me. But, you know, if they turned it over to the scientific community and not just a couple of guys here in the United States, I mean, you need a large group of people in a large lab to research what's going on there, not a little quiet installation. It's the security itself that prevents them from getting anywhere. I mean, they never do work hand in hand. You can't have a military mind. Science itself must communicate. You have to have a free exchange of ideas. That's how things progress. And when you clamp down on a security system like that, where you work in isolated groups and ideas cannot be exchanged, you don't get anywhere, and that's the problem they have.
What does the future hold for Bob Lazar?
Well, I'm not really involved in any of that stuff anymore. That's kind of put behind me. I have my own businesses that I work at, some computer graphics, some consultation, other technical jobs, radiation detectors, and a few other things like that. So really, I just go about my life, and that's, you know, something that happened that was fantastic, and it's over, but it's kind of hard to shake it loose. But eventually I will, and that'll be that. I think all the surveillance and everything stopped. I don't think anyone's bothering to monitor me. I've said everything that I know. It's been all over the place, so it's kind of a done deal. As far as whether or not there are any craft out there, I believe, you know, they were out and gone in probably the late '89, early '90, and the only thing people see now out there are, you know, either flares or planes coming into land, but that's about it.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile, found sometime last week, has been inspected at Roswell, New Mexico, and sent to Wright Field, Ohio, for further inspection.
Why in the world someone would invest such an amount of money, of efforts, of mise-en-scène to put together a 23-minute film of this kind? It defies reason. It doesn't make sense.
I cannot relate these structures to abdominal contents. The liver, if it were the liver, should be over here to the right. I'm seeing a mass that I cannot readily explain, and I have great difficulty in correlating this with any human body that I have seen. As difficult as it is for me to say it, as reluctant as I am to say it, that what I have seen here does not appear to be a human being. What is this? I would prefer to say, for the time being, that it is humanoid. I'm not going to say it is from a distant planet. What planet? I don't know. But I cannot say that it is a member of the human race as you and I know the human race. I have never performed an autopsy on any body that even closely resembles the being that we see on this film. There are 6 fingers on each hand, and there are also 6 toes on each foot. Are either pathologists or they're surgeons who have done a fair number of autopsies. This supposedly was filmed in 1947, and while things haven't changed, we see some things that would have been expected at that time, such as the use of a handsaw in removing the skull cap. I should also like to point out that this kind of a rectangular-shaped, somewhat sunken tray was the kind that I recall being around many, many years ago. We don't see these things around very much today, if at all.
Aluminum in appearance. There were fragments of aircraft skin or whatever the thing was, and also some girders with pictures of hieroglyphic-like things on it. I took them to be owls, but who knows?
An owl statue. While said to merely personify wisdom, the symbol of the owl has often been described as a prominent symbol of the aforementioned Illuminati.
What does it mean? Sorry, I'm all touching you. It means a lot of different things, but I mean, it's what's important to me. I don't think it's not really for other people to really know about. It's not really for other people to really know about.
Ye fools and priests! I spit upon your fire!
Stars don't move. Planets or anything that's like a planet does. So this is color-coded. This is what they saw on different nights. They're looking for one thing moving. They color-coded it to show that all these stars are staying still. This thing is moving. Our solar system is still terra incognita. It's full of surprises. This object is something that astronomers said shouldn't even be there. There's a whole other solar system beyond the planets that we know that are full of these things that are sort of planets, sort of comets. Some of them they call dwarf planets. That's what they're calling this one. What we're seeing is, we're seeing our neighborhood, we're seeing what's around us, and then the second part, we're seeing where we came from.
We're seeing where we came from. This doesn't add up. Yeah. We need to ask some other folks to take a look at this for us and tell us if we're crazy.
An ancient core of a gas giant that was ejected out to the farthest reaches of the solar system thousands and thousands and thousands of years ago. What does this tell us about our solar system?
Well, one thing it tells us is that we don't really understand it as well as we thought we did.